it like to turn your primary residence into a rental property? Today on the Real Life Planning Podcast, I'm here with Jen Sperling, who's done this twice. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons of turning an existing residence into a rental property, what it was like to take somewhere where you used to live and have total strangers walk around your living room. And we'll also talk about Jen's dream of building and scaling her real estate portfolio so she can eventually be work optional from her busy career as an attorney and follow her passion of managing her rentals. Jen, welcome. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Tell us what's important to know about you.
Oh, what's important to know about me? I have moved around a lot. I've lived in 7 states and 2 countries. I'm currently living in Los Angeles. I am an attorney. I've spent most of my career in public interest, working in legal aid or government and serving underserved communities. I'm really passionate about learning about real estate and personal finance. I am the proud owner now of 4 properties and hope to continue my growth in that space. I bought my first property in 2012, but didn't really get the full real estate bug until maybe a couple years ago. I have a lot of hobbies, playing music, weaving, hiking, and I live with my boyfriend, Tom, and my Labradoodle, Ferris.
If I remember correctly, your first property actually was something that you turned into a rental when you left. Am I right about that?
That's right. So I bought the property in 2012, and then in 2016, I moved from Philadelphia to Los Angeles to be closer to my brother and his kids, my nephews. I wasn't sure how long that would last. I thought I might go and live there for a few years while they were babies and toddlers, and then I would move back because I love Philadelphia. I still love Philadelphia. So in my mind, I wasn't planning a long-term move, but almost a decade later, I'm still in LA and that property is still a rental property.
You have an interesting take, Jen, about things that somebody should do before they leave their property and move somewhere else if they're planning to use it as a rental. What are those things?
Yes, this is from experience because I wish I had done this, but things that you might get questions about later and things that might break, and it would be helpful to know if they can be repaired. So the make and model of your appliances, laundry, dishwasher, your HVAC, the size of your HVAC filter. So you can buy replacements or quickly order them. And that's something your tenant might not know how to figure out. Also, the last date of service of any of those things, if you have had them serviced. If you haven't, then it is recommended that you do that before you move out to lessen the chance you're going to have to deal with it later. Just little things about the property like your trash days, recycling days, any kind of special instructions you might have for your tenant about that, if there's parking restrictions in your building or on your street. And then emergency contacts or like your go-to contractors, plumber, electrician, things like that. And just to keep a little like cheat sheet for yourself of that information so it's handy and all in place.
The things that contributed to your decision to turn it into a rental as opposed to sell it and take the capital gains tax exemption for the sale of a primary residence.
One was that I just loved the house. It was my first house that I had bought and I was attached to it. And I did think that I might move back. That was a very real possibility at the time that I was moving. I don't think at that time I didn't have a financial planner like you. I was not thinking strategically about capital gains taxes or exclusions. I was just thinking, oh, this is a great house in a great neighborhood. The neighborhood was appreciating. I could see that happening. And I thought, if I sell and I move back, I'm not going to be able to get the same property in the same place at the same price. So why don't I just see if I could hold on to it while I explore my options in Los Angeles?
It sounds like it was a really wise decision. What are some of the things that you had to do to learn the ins and outs of becoming a landlord?
Yeah. And I'll put a pin in, can you afford to do this? Because that's definitely something you should think about at the outset. But if you've figured out that you can and you're interested, first, think about your rental strategy. So I actually had it as a furnished rental for the first couple of years that I was there. It was a long-term furnished rental, but I had my furniture in it because I thought I was coming back. And so that's like a little bit of a different situation than if you're doing an unfurnished long-term or you're still thinking you're going to do a short-term rental. So you kind of want to think about what's your strategy going to be, and then can you legally do that, right? I think you're going to want to take a look at your local laws, local ordinances. You can't short-term rent properties everywhere. There might be limitations. If you're in a condo, for example, there might be limitations on how you rent. I rent a condo in Los Angeles. One of the restrictions in the CCNRs is that the leases have to be a year minimum. So I can't do like a midterm rental or a short-term rental there. And so it's just important to figure out what are the laws or rules that are governing your property, and do they put any restrictions on your rental strategy before you start. So that's one thing I would do. You might also want to check your mortgage, right? Because it depends if you have only lived in your house 3 months and you're going to turn around and start renting it out, that might be a problem for your lender. There's certainly situations they might understand if you had to move. It can be worked out sometimes, but that's something you'd want to check for or look for, and certainly not intentionally be doing something that your loan terms don't allow you to do. And your insurance as well. You're going to probably want to update your insurance documents to make sure that it's clear that you are turning the property into a rental and that you have sufficient insurance for that, because it's a different type of policy.
I want to put some emphasis on those two things because not everybody knows this. First, if you have a low down payment loan on your home purchase, generally you're going to have to stay in that property for at least a year before you would move out and turn it into a rental property. As Jen mentioned, there can be extenuating circumstances. You get transferred, or if you're in the military, you get redeployed somewhere else, for example. So it can be allowed, but you may have to explain it. Then on the insurance thing, that's quite important. I often see in my practice that people have had their original primary residence as a rental for several years, and they never told their insurance company that they needed a landlord policy. Generally, that insurance wouldn't cover you, right? So you have to call your insurance company and tell them that you're turning the property into a rental, and then you'll get a landlord policy, which doesn't cover the contents like the furniture you had in your house.
Right.
Did you pick a property manager right away? Did you manage it yourself from afar?
I managed it myself initially when it was furnished, and forget how I met the person or advertised it. This was like in 2016, so it could have been Craigslist. It's like we didn't have as many of the advanced applications that exist now for marketing and self-managing your rentals. So it was a bit DIY and word of mouth. Yeah, I think I just posted a listing and vetted it myself. I felt comfortable. It was like just like an older lady who had relocated to be closer to her daughter. So there were some simpatico motivations there. And she was intending to move herself in a few years, find a permanent spot. That also was important to my mindset at the time. Like I thought, I'm going to want to move back. And so if she's also going to want to move out, like that would be easier to coordinate. That is another thing to think about, like what your exit strategy is. If you do think you're going to move back into your rental, again, like local law might not make that super easy for you to simply just give a notice to your tenants and move back in if you have a lease in place. So if the exact timing of when you get to move back into a property is important, then you want to think about your strategy. Certainly that's a lot easier to do if you're doing a short-term rental or a midterm rental than a long-term rental, because you just have more control over when people can come and go in your units. But yeah, that aside, it was like her situation worked with what I was thinking at the time was going to be my situation.
You're an attorney, so you probably knew something already about the fair housing laws in general. What would you suggest to somebody who was getting ready to turn their existing home into a rental, and in terms of how they get smart about the local landlord-tenant laws and the fair housing laws in general?
Nowadays, you can use AI and ChatGPT to give you an overview, but you do need to do research. And if you are not willing to put in the time and effort to do the research, then I probably would hire a property manager, and they are going to be familiar with those laws and take on that liability from you. Those laws are very important, and they're nuanced. There's definitely certain things you cannot put in your advertisements. I wasn't looking for the exact characteristics of the person I ultimately found, but I couldn't also say in an ad, I'm looking for older woman without children who is
No pets.
no longer than 2 years. Yeah, you can't use those kinds of factors to make housing decisions legally and, in my view, ethically.
So you went to California. How long did you rent in California before you bought your next place?
I bounced around with some renting rooms here and there for a little bit until I found a job. And then I think it was within 2 years of moving to LA, I made my first home purchase. And that was a condominium in a larger building, has 178 units total. Most of them are 1-bedroom units. The building was converted from an apartment building built in the 70s. But what was attractive to me about it was that it was walking distance to my then office. And if you have an experience with LA, commuting is a thing. And coming from the East Coast, I was so used to being in a walkable area. It was really important for me to not have a long commute. So when I found this building that was close to a job that I thought I was going to have for many years, I jumped at that opportunity.
It makes me think of that movie LA Story, where Steve Martin gets in the car and drives down like a driveway to commute to his next meeting. So you stayed in this apartment, this condo, excuse me, and then you also turned that one into a rental, right?
I did. I was not expecting that either. I'm picking up speed, but still going with the flow with these decisions. I was lucky enough to have bought that unit when interest rates were very low. If I knew now what I know about interest rates and how important they are to running the numbers in investment properties, probably would have tried to buy more properties back in 2018 to 2020, but
Yeah, me too. We all wish that.
But the benefit to me of just that happening to be the case was that then my mortgage, and even including the HOA fees and the taxes, I'm able to cover that with a market rate tenant. So my boyfriend moved in with me in maybe 2019, I guess it was 2020. It was COVID era.
Before COVID, yeah.
Anything after COVID is a blur, but he moved in at some point and it was a 1-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom. And I saw the opportunity to get us into a larger space and took it. And this is, in retrospect, kind of an interesting decision, and maybe a decision point that other people considering it would find interesting to hear about. But because I didn't sell, and because I had put 20% down into that property, I was more cash poor than I would have been if I had sold the property and rolled those profits, which would have been excluded from capital gains tax, rolled those into the next property. So I possibly could have got myself into a little house in LA if I had sold the condo. As it was, both because the debt contributed to my debt to income ratio. So the banks will only they'll only lend so much, and it depends in part on how much debt you have already. Because I had the debt from that property, I was limited into how much more debt I could take on. Again, in Los Angeles, that kind of limits you to a certain level of house. So sometimes I think about, if I wonder if I had sold instead, would I have been able to buy a house? And then in LA, owning a house, they appreciate more quickly. In most markets, houses appreciate more quickly than condominiums. Would that have been a better decision? But in hindsight's 2020. But if you're looking at that, if you're someone who's now thinking about that going forward, I think that's something to think about. What would you use the proceeds from selling your house for? And play that out 5 years, 10 years down the line? Are you going to be in a better financial position by putting that money into another home or another investment, a different type of investment? And try to do that math before you make the decision.
Makes sense. And so the other rental properties that you own, are they multifamily or more single family homes?
They are all single family homes. I am a fan of the single family home.
What do you like most about the single family home? There are definitely some advantages.
In my view, I think they're just more versatile. There's more exit strategies and more of a market if you do need to sell single family home. I think there's just more people who are looking to buy single family homes than duplexes. Also, since I'm new at deal analysis, factoring in the market, it's a little easier for me with single family homes, duplexes, or multifamily. They do appreciate with the market, but they also correspond to the upkeep of the property and what the current rents are. It's a little bit more of buying a business in a way.
No, it absolutely is more of buying a business. When you see a duplex on Zillow or Redfin, for example, and they'll list it as a price per square foot, and that bears almost no relationship to what an investor would pay for the property. A house hacker, somebody who's looking to live in one unit and rent out the other units, might be willing to pay a little bit more for that type of property because they're looking at it as their future home. But an investor is just going to look at the net cash, at the net operating income, right, divided by the cap rates to think about how they're going to make an offer on that property. So I do agree with you that in general, the single family home has more options for a quick exit if one is needed. I also think there's a cap on the rent that somebody would pay for a single family home, because if the cost of renting it starts to be equivalent or higher than the cost of owning it, of course, then somebody would try and get a low down payment loan and buy a similar property instead. So there's a little bit more of a rent cap. What are some of the other things that you've learned at building your real estate portfolio? You have a nice mid-sized real estate portfolio. What have you learned so far that you would share with the new real estate investor who's just thinking about turning their first house into a rental?
I think it is a great place to start because it takes away one of the biggest sort of hills to climb when you're thinking about becoming a real estate investor, which is acquisition. You already have this asset. And so you're really just thinking about how will the asset perform as an investment as opposed to all of those other numbers about, oh, what are my closing costs and what's my down payment? You've already invested those things. And so I think it can be a good place to start because that piece is already out of the way. And you are already familiar with the house. You're familiar with what living in that space feels, and you can address maintenance issues easily and quickly because you know about them. And if you're handy at all, you can do them yourself. So from that perspective, I think it is one of the lowest barriers to entry if you're thinking about acquiring a real estate asset.
Are there any differences that you see between house as a rental property and a condo as a rental property that people should be aware?
They both have pros and cons as they do living in one. From the analysis perspective, you have your HOA dues, and that usually adds a significant amount to your monthly mortgage. So it can be harder to cash flow on a property that has that added expense than without. The HOA dues on my rental are about like $550 a month. If the same property were a single family home, that's $550 a month I could be putting towards other capital expenses or savings or cash flow. But the flip side for that is that the HOA does pay for some things that as a single family home owner, I'm not going to have to pay for, like the roof. I will never have to replace a roof myself on my condo. Boilers, things like that. Those are not my responsibility directly. I pay for them through the HOA dues that I pay, as well as landscaping that includes security and other benefits and things that are beneficial to tenants. The building I own has an on-site property manager, for example, and my tenant has an actual person that they can talk to if something is amiss. And the single family home, you really have to figure out how to do that. If you live in a snowy area, you have to figure out how is the driveway going to get shoveled and who's going to rake the leaves and how are you going to figure out trash. And sometimes you can put that on your tenant in a lease, but sometimes you can't. And so more of the maintenance is something that is going to fall on you and be your financial responsibility.
Even if it is on the tenant to take care of all the utilities and the maintenance and care of the home in terms of keeping the lawn mowed and cleaning the gutters and all the things, I've found is for that some of the single family homes that we have where we're not doing it, whereas we are doing it, our property management team is doing it for the multifamilies that we own, that sometimes people don't do it. We've been rental property owners since the Great Recession. At least once a year, somebody doesn't pay their water bill, or somebody moves out and it turns out they never cleaned the gutters in 18 months, or they don't notify the property manager when there's an issue that could turn a little issue now, but it could turn to be a big issue later. And so I found that could be any property that can happen. Of course, you can't ask for this. But I've found that some of the best tenants have been people who have relocated. So they already owned a house before, so they know how to take care of what.
Yeah.
That's that. Generally, that's not going to happen. So
the number of things that can go wrong in a house, I think, more than the number of things that could go wrong in a condo.
Yes, or at least and if there's a shared responsibility on condos. But you're right, Dan. Generally, condos do not appreciate the same way that a single family home would appreciate. If there's appreciation, so there's a normal appreciation that is inflation adjusted. The rents are going up with inflation. The property should go up to commensurate with inflation. Appreciation is what we see in the Los Angeles area, where there are infinitely more buyers than sellers. And that has exploded the price per square foot of housing because housing is such a rare and difficult resource, particularly in the entry-level space.
Yeah.
So,
the other thing I forgot to mention about condominiums is that if your building has deferred maintenance, there is a mechanism by which the community raises funds to cover things called an assessment or special assessment. Sometimes it's an emergency assessment. And those can be quite large amounts of money, like tens of thousands of dollars to do.
We see it down in Florida. It's happening in Florida right now. A lot of the beach area condo complexes are getting huge assessments and people can't afford to live there anymore.
And if you're the owner, you may not be able to also afford the assessment, but you are on the hook for it. And assessment they can foreclose on your home, your condominium, if you don't pay your special assessment. So it's a type of expense that you really don't have a lot of control over as a homeowner. And you don't have a lot of control over whether maintenance is being deferred. If you're not on the board or you're coming into the situation with like limited information, you don't necessarily know everything about the building when you're buying into it. And quite in the same way that you can really hire as many different inspectors as you want for when you buy a home. So yeah, I think you can control your costs a little better with a single family home, especially one that you've owned and are familiar with. But as familiar as I am with the inside walls of my unit, I'm on the board of my condominium now. And that's maybe a conversation for another podcast. You learn things. And then you also just learn how expensive it is to fix things, especially for large buildings. So
a crash course in commercial multifamily real estate.
Yes.
And now, Jen, you recently participated in a flip. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I was a private money lender for a flip in Los Angeles. And that was, I guess, I would love to do my own flip. I do not have the capital to fund my own flip here in Los Angeles, but was really grateful for the opportunity to work with a flipper here who's done things a lot. And she was a great person to do my first investment with because the property was in the LA area because I was able to drive there and see it and see the different stages of construction. And that was really exciting. And yes, hopefully this afternoon, FedEx will be delivering to me the return of my principal investment.
Congratulations. What's next for you, do you think, in terms of real estate? Like, where are you headed?
Yeah, I'm definitely considering a live-in flip. That's definitely a possibility. I would consider private lending again for sure. And I'm working also on trying to find my people within the real estate investing space. I have observed what I guess is attention for me personally, being someone who has dedicated so much of my career to public interest and does understand a lot of the tensions within real estate, gentrification, the tension between landlords and tenants and their rights and obligations. And I'm just really committed to finding a way to align my capital with my values. And I think there is a lot of exciting opportunities to use real estate investing and property ownership to do good in the community and have businesses that are giving back and operating ethically and sustainably. And I know there's other investors out there who care about those kinds of things, but I haven't necessarily been meeting them in the places I've been showing up. So I recently launched like a website. I think it's going to be a blog. Maybe at some point it'll be a podcast where I can connect with, spotlight other investors. It's called Better World Real Estate. And yeah, I'm excited to dive into that. And maybe eventually I will have my own fund that will invest in the kinds of real estate projects that I want to see in the world.
Oh, I love that idea. There are so many people who own rental properties, and I know many of them on the books of our business that we work with as financial planners for real estate investors, and people I met in my earlier life when I was an organizer. And lots of mom and pop folks own rental properties, and they do well by their tenants. They provide beautiful housing for people to live in, and they're not jerks. They keep the housing nice. They're not slumlord based into the imagination, and they do well by their tenants, and they're providing an important service in the world. And then we get into the issues around what happens when somebody doesn't pay you. And I know we've all struggled with that as investment property owners. Every investment property owner does, because it happens sometimes. People get into financial stress. And then how do you handle a situation like that compassionately, both having compassion for your tenant, but also having compassion for yourself? And it's tricky, right?
Yeah. And I would love to, so I have an ask an ethics person about how do you handle this? How do you stay true to yourself?
Mm.
Yes, do deals, but also do good and feel good about yourself while participating in a business that does have a dark side.
I would love for more of us to get together and figure out how to create more entry-level housing, more moderate level housing for people to buy. But I personally think there should be more places where somebody could go into house hack, right? Where you could buy a little duplex with a low down payment. It's almost impossible. In some urban areas, it's almost impossible for a married couple with high incomes to get enough, to bootstrap enough together to make the down payment on a house, like the LA area, for example. So I'd just like to see us focus more on that as a nation.
Absolutely.
What are you curious about right now?
Aside from being curious about where these other investors are who I want to meet and talk to, I am curious how to use a tile saw. I've been doing some DIY projects around the house, getting ready for my eventual flip, and hung this wallpaper actually,
Very nice.
paste and everything. Put in a floating floor, but have not yet tried tile, and that's what I'd like to try next.
There's a YouTube video for everything, but that seems like the kind of thing you might want to learn from somebody else in person. Get a Home Depot class or whatever. Jen, I know you like to post your projects on your Instagram. Tell people where they can find you if they want to follow you.
Sure. So on Instagram, I'm at Little Jen Builds, and I do post my projects, and I posted a bit about the private lending that I've done. And if you are interested in doing good while doing deals, check out also betterworld-realestate.com. There's a forum you can email me through, and we can connect.
Jen, thank you so much for this conversation today. I think it was really helpful for those folks who may be contemplating turning their first property into a rental, and hopefully they can follow in your footsteps.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.